this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Running a business is hard enough. Don't make it harder with a dozen apps that don't talk to each other. One for sales, another for inventory, a separate one for accounting. That's software overload. Odoo is the all-in-one platform that replaces them all. CRM, accounting, inventory, e-commerce, HR. Fully integrated, easy to use, and built to grow with your business. Thousands have already made the switch. Why not you? Try Odoo for free at odoo.com. That's odoo.com.
It's an Olympics you'll never forget. Prime time in Milan. The moments.
Chloe Kim with the gold medal flex.
The stars.
Ilya Malinin.
Out of this world.
The spectacle from beautiful northern Italy with very special guests every night of the Olympics. Experience the world's biggest show. Prime time in Milan, tonight 8/7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Why have I asked my electrician I found on Angie.com to bury my pet hamster Nibbles in our yard for me? Because I was so moved by how carefully he buried my electrical wires, I knew I could trust him to bury my sweet Nibbles after his untimely end. Nibbles, gone too soon. May he scurry in peace.
Hey, sorry about your pet, but I just wire stuff.
Nibbles would have loved you like a brother.
Connecting homeowners with skilled pros for over 30 years. Angie, the one you trust to find the ones you trust. Find pros for all your home projects at Angie.com.
The big game commercials are basically must-see TV. This year, Elf Cosmetics went all out with an absurdly funny telenovela called Melissa. It stars Melissa McCarthy, Nicholas Gonzalez, Itati Cantoral, and Elf Glow Reviver Lip Oil. The Elf Glow Reviver Lip Oil is an ultra-glossy tinted lip oil that nourishes, hydrates, and enhances your lips' natural color.
Watch the full episode of their new Elf novela on soyunbaño.com.
Support for The Middle comes from the stations that air the show and from you. Thanks for making a donation at listentothemiddle.com.
Welcome to a special edition of The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson in Los Angeles. Venezuela's President Nicholas Maduro and his wife remain in U.S. custody in New York tonight after pleading not guilty in court today. They faced drug trafficking and weapons charges. They were captured by U.S. forces in Caracas over the weekend. President Trump ordered that mission without notifying Congress beforehand or seeking authorization. He now says the U.S. is going to run Venezuela for the foreseeable future and that American oil companies will go in to fix the oil infrastructure and start selling Venezuela's oil. Many Venezuelans living in the United States are cheering the capture of Maduro, who led the country with an iron fist and plunged the economy into chaos. And many lawmakers and foreign leaders are calling the mission illegal. But what comes next for Venezuela is unclear. The vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, has been sworn in as Maduro's successor. She was part of his inner circle and has said that he is still the true president. President Trump, though, says she will do, quote, whatever the U.S. asks. So this hour, we want to know what you think about all of this, about the U.S. getting deeply involved in Venezuela's affairs. You can call us at 844-4-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. Or you can reach out at listentothemiddle.com. We're on our live stream on YouTube. Joining me this hour from Mexico City, Enrique Acevedo, anchor and managing editor of En Punto, which is one of the largest TV news programs in Latin America. Enrique, great to have you.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. It's great to be here.
And Jennifer Griffin also joins us, chief national security correspondent for Fox News. She's in Washington. Jennifer, great to have you back.
Thank you, Jeremy. Great to be back.
Well, Jennifer, one of the things that has been confusing about this is what exactly President means by the U.S. running Venezuela. The Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, indicated in many interviews that what he means is that the U.S. now has leverage over the Venezuelan government. What is your understanding about the U.S. involvement in the day-to-day business of Venezuela?
Well, I think it's very confusing. As you said, the president says one thing, his Secretary of State says another. He tampers down the fact that the U.S. essentially is controlling Venezuela because they've essentially elevated the vice president to a puppet status, and they have an oil embargo that they're enforcing with the U.S. Navy. So on the one hand, there's this confusing message that's taking place. Was this a law enforcement action to simply snatch and grab somebody who had been indicted in the Southern District of New York, Maduro, and his wife? Or is this regime change? It doesn't look like regime change because you're keeping the Maduro regime, except for Maduro, in power. But it's confused messaging, and it's confusing Congress. Today, just moments ago, they came out of a classified briefing that Secretary Rubio, Secretary Hegseth, General Kane, as well as John Ratcliffe, the CIA director, gave to the Gang of Eight. And Chuck Grassley, Senator Chuck Grassley and Senator Dick Durbin were angry because they're the heads of the Judiciary Committee. If this is a law enforcement operation, as the administration is claiming, so as to avoid the oversight of Congress in terms of a potential AUMF and authorization for the use of military force and other oversight mechanisms, then why wouldn't they include the heads of the Judiciary Committee? So again, there are so many different excuses for this operation that have been given, and legally it's making our heads spin. And I'm sure that every time a member of the administration that opens their mouth, that the defense lawyers for Nicholas Maduro and his wife are very pleased because they're going to be able to use it against them.
Yeah, Enrique, what do you think? Regime change or not regime change? Because as we've said, Delcy Rodriguez was part of Maduro's inner circle.
I think the Trump administration has been very careful and deliberate to not open up a conversation about regime change by allowing Delcy Rodriguez to remain in power, by allowing the power structure in Venezuela to basically remain I don't want to say untouched, because basically the person leading that structure was captured and transported to a court in Manhattan. But the rest of that structure remains in power. And I think, the removal, the capture of Nicolas Maduro is something that the world should welcome unequivocally. Venezuela has endured one of the deepest peacetime collapses in modern history: the mass exile, the institutional decay, the repression, the systemic dismantling of democracy. The concern here, and I think the confusion that Jennifer was describing, extends to Latin America and to governments in the Western Hemisphere. It's not just about what happened, but who did it and why. When the United States acts as a decisive force, removing a head of state, even a dictator in this case, it echoes a century-long pattern in the hemisphere where Washington decides which governments are tolerable and which governments are not. I think that legacy lives in the political bloodstream of Latin America. So while many people, me included, welcome Maduro's removal because of the humanitarian catastrophe that Venezuela and Venezuelans are experiencing, we're also asking whether this signals a return to a hemispheric order where power, not necessarily principle, that defines legitimacy.
Well, and you mentioned the history in the region, Jennifer. We also think about places that the U.S., quote, liberated, like Iraq and Libya. And yes, they got rid of despots, but what came next was chaos and a lot of trouble for the people in those countries and for the United States. Are there concerns even within the Trump administration about whether this could go wrong and not the way that they want it to by taking out Maduro?
Well, we heard just a few moments ago that there were videos circulating on social media that have been verified that there is shooting in the Capitol, shooting near the palace. Their air defensives seem to have been firing into the air. It's not clear whether there are U.S. warplanes or spy planes up above if they were shooting at that. But there is this is only a few days old, and we've seen in the past, in Iraq. It looked like everybody welcomed the fall of Saddam Hussein, the same in Libya. But then what comes next is the problem. I think one of the more shocking things that President Trump said on Saturday was his criticism of Maria Corina Machado, who had just received the Nobel Peace Prize. And of course, she is the opposition leader and her party received more than 70% of the vote the last time there was a presidential election. Most people in most of the world views them as the elected leaders of Venezuela, and yet the president went out of his way to say that she is not really very popular, not well liked, not respected in Venezuela. It's clear that what they didn't want to do is put a weak leader in, or a leader that doesn't have control of the security apparatus, and have what they had happen in Iraq, which was the de-Baathification, and basically the military scattered and changed their, and a civil war was basically began. So on the one hand, they're trying to split the baby, but again, are Venezuelans in the U.S. going to be happy when they find out that the same Maduro regime is in power, just without Maduro?
What about, Enrique, the issue of the other countries in the region, which have already been brought up by the administration? Cuba, they said, the President Trump has already threatened Cuba could be next. The president of Colombia should watch himself. He's talked about Mexico as well. How are the other countries in the region reacting?
I think it's complex because each of the cases you just mentioned are extremely different. The U.S. and Mexico have a unique relationship through trade, through a shared border, cultural and political ties. More than 35 million Latinos in the U.S. are from Mexican descent. So the history, the integration between these two countries is very different from what we see with Colombia or other countries in Central America. The case of Nicaragua, where you have one of the most repressive dictatorships anywhere in the world, with Daniel Ortega and his family. In Colombia, you have a government like Gustavo Petro's government that has been very belligerent and rhetorically sometimes even hostile towards the United States. I think the levels of cooperation, of understanding are different, and I think that makes a difference. You see it in the rhetoric coming out of the State Department, Marco Rubio highlighting the historic cooperation between Mexico and Washington, even though you don't see you don't hear the same message necessarily from other voices in the Republican Party or even in the administration. But you see there's a level of relation and cooperation that's very different from what we see in other places. I think everyone is listening. Like I was saying at the beginning of this conversation, the confusion extends to the entire hemisphere because we're not exactly sure what the president means when he says something has to be done with Mexico in terms of drugs. This rationale that the reason why Washington is acting is because narco-terrorists have gained control over state institutions and structures all over Latin America, collides with the reality that the United States has basically armed these organizations by providing, according to the Department of Justice, up to 75-80% of all the weapons seized by these drug organizations. So.
And also the reality, Enrique, that a lot of the drugs are not coming from Venezuela; they're coming from Mexico. They're coming from other countries, and not Venezuela. And so that is a key fact as well. As you've talked about, the act of capturing a foreign leader is not unprecedented for the United States. That was one of the central goals of the U.S. invasion of Panama in 1989. And in that case, the country's leader, General Manuel Noriega, was wanted by U.S. authorities for racketeering and drug trafficking. Here is President George H.W. Bush announcing his capture back in 1990.
Well, on Wednesday, December 20th, I ordered U.S. troops to Panama with 4 objectives: to safeguard the lives of American citizens, to help restore democracy, to protect the integrity of the Panama Canal treaties, and to bring General Manuel Noriega to justice. All of these objectives have now been achieved.
Noriega was convicted and sentenced to 40 years in prison. He died in 2017. Your calls are coming up on The Middle.
It's an Olympics you'll never forget. Prime time in Milan. The moments.
Chloe Kim with the gold medal flex.
The stars.
William Malinan.
Out of this world.
The spectacle from beautiful northern Italy with very special guests every night of the Olympics. Experience the world's biggest show. Prime time in Milan, tonight 8/7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Why have we asked our contractor we found on Angie.com to be our kids' legal guardian? Because he took such good care when redoing our basement that we knew we could trust him to care for our kids, all 8 of them, should something happen to us.
Are you my dad now?
No, sorry, I do basements. Connecting homeowners with skilled pros for over 30 years. Angie, the one you trust to find the ones you trust. Find pros for all your home projects at Angie.com.
Well, the holidays have come and gone once again, but if you've forgotten to get that special someone in your life a gift, well, Mint Mobile is extending their holiday offer of half off unlimited wireless. So here's the idea. You get it now, you call it an early present for next year. What do you have to lose? Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Limited time 50% off regular price for new customers. Upfront payment required. $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan. Taxes and fees extra. Speeds may slow after 50 gigabytes per month when network is busy. See terms.
How do you make chicken nuggets like 7,000% better? Short answer, you let Taco Bell make them. Long answer, start with all white meat chicken nuggets. Bread them in crunchy tortilla chips and serve them with Hidden Valley Diablo Ranch. Yep, that's Hidden Valley Ranch mixed with Taco Bell Diablo sauce. It's exactly what it sounds like, and somehow even better. Simple math, spicy results. Crispy chicken nuggets from Taco Bell. A brand new classic. At participating U.S. Taco Bell locations for a limited time only, while supplies last.
This is The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. If you're just tuning in, The Middle is a national call-in show. We're focused on elevating voices from the middle, geographically, politically, and philosophically, or maybe you just want to meet in the middle. This hour, we want to know what you think about the U.S. intervention in Venezuela. You can reach us at 844-4MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. Or you can write in at listentothemiddle.com. I am joined by Enrique Acevedo, managing editor and anchor of Televisa's En Punto, and Jennifer Griffin, chief national security correspondent for Fox News. And before we get to the phones, and the lines are completely full, so we're going to have some great calls this hour. Let's take a listen to a voice memo that we got from a Venezuelan American listener in Miami.
Hi, Jeremy. This is Carl Luis Rodriguez. I'm from Venezuela. I am calling from Miami, and I've been living in the U.S. for the last 10 years. I want to be clear, I am not a Trump supporter, but as a Venezuelan, I truly appreciate the U.S. decision to take legal action against Nicholas Maduro. I bring his case to court in New York. For us, this is not about politics, it's about justice. For more than 26 years, Venezuela has lived under a government that destroyed the economy, took away our freedom, and forced millions of people to leave the country. We have watched our home fall apart year after year. Seeing real action finally happening gives us hope.
Enrique, this is what we've been seeing across social media from Venezuelans, which is grateful, hopeful about the future, because under Maduro there was no hope.
Yes, I think even invoking non-intervention as a blanket principle ignores the scale of the suffering, the scale of the catastrophe, the humanitarian catastrophe in Venezuela. Sovereignty belongs to the citizens, not to the strongmen who hijack their states. So a morally serious discussion, a rigorous discussion about what's happening, the complex situation on the ground in Venezuela, has to hold these two realities together. Intervention is fraught and dangerous. It's a dangerous precedent. And doing nothing has been absolutely catastrophic for Venezuelans for way too long. And I think that just tells you how nuanced this conversation needs to be about what's happening in Venezuela. Because, and this is an important point, I think, Jeremy, the absence of a mass mobilization in Venezuela in the last couple of days, neither celebrations nor mass defense of the regime, points to a society that it's traumatized, exhausted. Years, decades of repression and scarcity have turned politics from a space of participation into a matter of survival. And people are scared. They want to express their freedom, but they're still not in a position where they can do that. That just speaks to the situation that they've been going through for so many years.
Let's get to Nancy in Denver, Colorado. Nancy, welcome to The Middle. Your thoughts on the U.S. intervention in Venezuela?
Well, mixed thoughts about the actual intervention. But now that it's removed an evil dictator, I'm just surprised that President Trump has not even recognized the duly elected, legitimate elected president who won the Nobel Peace Prize. And to me, if we were on the up and up, and if this wasn't for oil, he would have reinstated her, as Bush did with Noriega. He reinstated a Democratic president. So this is my comment. Thank you for taking my call.
Thank you so much, Nancy. And Jennifer, that's exactly what you were talking about. Machado, the president, came out and said that he didn't think she had the support. And in fact, I saw Stephen Miller, one of the top aides of the president, on a news program today saying that she didn't have the support in the military, and that's why they didn't want to put her in.
Well, again, as we said, it is absolutely understandable that there are celebrations that a terrible, terrible dictator, Nicholas Maduro, is gone from Venezuela. The problem is I have not heard any messaging from this administration that democracy, freedom, any of the humanitarian values that typically have been used as at least a partial excuse for U.S. intervention around the world, none of those words were used. In fact, Stephen Miller was on CNN tonight, and he said that the world is governed by force and power, and that by definition, we are in charge. The U.S. is in charge. That is a very different message. And the fact that there is not really much talk about elections or the opposition and finding legitimate leadership for Venezuela and keeping the entire Maduro apparatus in place and immediately talking about the oil is just very confusing to me. And I think the only way to really understand what is motivating President Trump right now is what we saw in the National Defense Strategy, which was released in December, of dividing the world into spheres of influence. And essentially, he's saying that the Western Hemisphere is the U.S. sphere of influence. And we heard Fiona Hill, who served at the end of his first administration, warned that at the end of the administration, there was talk that Russia, through its state-run media, was saying, let us do what we want in Ukraine and you can do whatever you want in Venezuela. And she was actually dispatched to Moscow to tamp down that kind of talk. So the question is, second time around, does Trump believe that the U.S. can do whatever it wants, and that's why they're talking about Greenland and Colombia and Panama and Cuba in the same breath as Venezuela, because this is really more about resources and pushing China and Russia out of this so-called sphere of influence. But what message is Russia and China taking, and what is the U.S. planning to do to defend Ukraine, to defend Taiwan? We've just seen the largest military exercises in the history of China against Taiwan at the end of December. What did the U.S. do? Nothing.
Let's get to Art, who's in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Art, go ahead with your thoughts about the U.S. involvement in Venezuela.
Yeah, thanks for taking my call. So I was in Venezuela when Chavez was in power on both a religious trip and a lawyer's trip. And there was reference to humanitarian catastrophe. So what your listeners need to understand is that the textbook U.S. approach to popular revolutions or movements that the U.S. doesn't like. And this is a direct quote. U.S. policy is to, quote, bring about hunger, desperation, and overthrow of government, end quote. And what happened in Venezuela, occasionally you hear reference to the word sanctions, but not very often in our media, was to destroy the economy, causing millions of people to be desperate, hungry, left the country. By the way, when we were there were millions of refugees, but they were taken in by Venezuela from Colombia.
So okay, so you're saying it was the U.S. policy, Art. I think we've got it there. Enrique, what about that? Just a lot of skepticism about what the U.S. actually does when it gets involved in other countries in the region. Whether it's we heard Jennifer just there talk about oil. President Trump has come right out and said that is a big part of what's going on here.
No, I think in Latin America, we're used to this pattern where democracy promotion is framed as the headline, while strategic gain is really the fine print. And now we're seeing how energy, security, migration, the argument of regional stability are real considerations and the supreme criteria for acting in the region. So it's a realist approach to the region, the so-called Monroe doctrine,
right. Donald Trump,
making
Monroe,
reference to the Monroe doctrine, and this division of geopolitics through the spheres of influence that Jennifer was referring to. I think that it's not just rhetoric. It's just not just a narrative. I think it's a real change of paradigm. We see it in action through what's happening in Venezuela. We saw it for many, many weeks with the boats coming out of the Pacific coast and the Atlantic coast in South America. Mm-hmm. And the idea that we're not just going to talk about stopping narco-terrorists, we're going to act in a very decisive way. And so I think this is at the heart of what we're discussing, a new approach to being the regional superpower and the responsibility and the actions that's carrying. I think they're being very transparent and explicit about it. There's in that sense, we should believe what the administration has been saying because they've been acting on it.
Some comments coming in at listentothemiddle.com. Kathy in Alabama says, I suspect the invasion is illegal and the congressional and Senate Republicans seem scared and missing some obvious issues. Matthew in Texas writes, if Trump would let Venezuela return to its democratic roots, I would applaud that, but I don't think Trump is going to do that. And Noah in New Hampshire says, I work in a middle school as a substitute music teacher. Today, one of my kids had the "Are we the bad guys?" moment. In a way, it's refreshing that the administration dropped any pretense of it being about anything but oil. Let's go to Chris, who's calling in from Fort Worth, Texas. Hi, Chris. Go ahead with your thoughts.
Hi there. I wouldn't really have too much of an issue with this if it weren't for the fact that this administration had just pardoned the former Honduran president for very similar charges.
For drug charges, right? Very interesting point. I'm glad you brought that up. Jennifer Griffin, that is true. People have been saying that, Trump just pardoned the Honduran president on drug trafficking issues, and then he goes and captures Maduro on charges of the exact same basic thing.
Again, it raises the question, is this really about drugs, or was that the pretense they needed in order to send the military and the FBI and DEA in to basically decapitate the leader of another country? The UN spoke today. There was an emergency UN Security Council meeting in which most members of the Security Council and allies like France said that this is and the head of the Secretary General of the UN said this is in violation of the UN Charter, that this was not simply a law enforcement mechanism, it was violating the territorial integrity of another country, and that is against international law. So is this about drugs, or is this about resources and great power competition and trying to position the U.S. because they had basically been asleep at the wheel for a long time and allowed Russia and China to move into their backyard? I think those are real questions. And if you look at the indictment in the Southern District of New York today, it's very different from the indictment in 2020. You'll notice that they took out 32 references to the cartel that the administration had been saying that Maduro was the head of, Cartel de los Soles. Enrique can explain further, but my understanding is that that was never an organization or a terrorist, narco-terrorist group. It was a slang term in the 90s to talk about corruption in the military and how they were benefiting from drug money. And the solace was referring to the sun on the shoulders of the colonels in the military. The fact that they took that out suggested they knew they were on thin ice with that argument and might lose in the court of law. The one thing about the U.S. is we still have a legal system that once, Maduro's going to have a year of discovery of top lawyers here in the U.S. defending him. And a lot of these excuses that they've used for the public are going to possibly fall apart.
I saw one of the betting, because now you can bet on everything. And one of the online betting things about whether Maduro is going to walk free, it looks like it's getting better in his direction right now. Let's go to Brian, who's calling from Tampa, Florida, where a lot of Venezuelan Americans live. Brian, go ahead. What do you think about the U.S. involvement in Venezuela?
Well, I believe we need to be involved in Latin America and around the world. And I think that we are losing our soft power the way this administration did with the Doge cuts and just the whole attitude. I'm a Republican, but I vote against Trump in the primary. I vote against him every time I can. One or two things he'll do I can agree with. I called him before on the attack on Iran. But if it's the criminality that bothers me, it's not done to the letter of the law. And we need to be, I would like to see more involvement along the lines of a Peace Corps like JFK had. Rather than military intervention. We should help our neighbors. We should be dominant in this hemisphere. I don't like to see our adversaries moving in. So I can see the motivation for intervention, but our intervention has to be done the right way.
Yeah, Brian, thank you very much for that. Enrique, it just brings up the idea of sort of the image that we Americans have about ourselves as the good guys, and are we the good guys when we use our power to get what we want, as opposed to using our power for the good Samaritan reasons?
I think that's a hard question to answer because American influence has been in decline in that part of the hemisphere, specifically in South America. You see China as the main trading partner of countries like Brazil, Argentina, countries like Colombia and Ecuador and others. Not just the main trading partner, but also a major investment force in essential infrastructure projects. And that investment doesn't come for free. There is a real political and cultural play behind that influence, and so I think it is a legitimate concern for Washington and for the rest of the hemisphere to see actors like China, Russia, Iran with real interests and real leverage in places like Venezuela. For different reasons. I don't want to put all of those in the same box. So how do you deal with that? I think the roadmap is what's been happening with Mexico and other places in the region, Jeremy.
Well, not so long ago, President Trump was very adamant about ending U.S. intervention in other nations. Listen to him here during his diplomatic trip to Saudi Arabia in May of last year.
And it's crucial for the wider world to note this great transformation has not come from Western interventionists or flying people in beautiful planes giving you lectures on how to live and how to govern your own affairs. No, the gleaming marvels of Riyadh and Abu Dhabi were not created by the so-called nation builders, neocons, or liberal nonprofits like those who spent trillions and trillions of dollars failing to develop Kabul, Baghdad, so many other cities. Instead, the birth of a modern Middle East has been brought by the people of the region themselves.
President Trump in May of 2025. You're listening to The Middle.
It's an Olympics you'll never forget. Prime time in Milan. The moments.
Chloe Kim with the gold medal flex.
The stars.
Ilya Malinin.
Out of this world.
The spectacle from beautiful northern Italy with very special guests every night of the Olympics. Experience the world's biggest show. Prime time in Milan. Tonight, 8/7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Why have we asked our contractor we found on Angie.com to be our kids' legal guardian? Because he took such good care when redoing our basement that we knew we could trust him to care for our kids, all 8 of them, should something happen to us.
Are you my dad now?
No, sorry, I do basements. Connecting homeowners with skilled pros for over 30 years. Angie, the one you trust to find the ones you trust. Find pros for all your home projects at Angie.com.
Ever wonder why so many people regain weight after stopping a GLP-1? Up to 40% of the weight lost can come from lean muscle. This weakens the body, slows metabolism, and makes it easier to put the pounds back on, creating a cycle of dependency. Prolon's 5-day fasting-mimicking diet offers a drug-free way to maintain results and support long-term metabolic health. In just 5 days, it activates fasting pathways to burn fat, protect muscle, and rejuvenate cells, all while letting you enjoy real food. Get 15% off plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe at prolonlife.com/iHeart. That's prolonlife.com/iHeart.
You see it instantly. It's Coldwater Creek, the mark of exceptional workmanship and signature touches inspired by a Mountain West heritage. Distinctive styles created from quality fabrics, silhouettes perfected with just the right drape, feel-good fits offering ease of movement, and thoughtful details to elevate your look. Coldwater Creek's authenticity is embodied in every piece, embracing its confident spirit that carries through to today. Discover Coldwater Creek clothing, designed to fit your life the way you want. For a wardrobe you can count on season after season, visit coldwatercreek.com. Shop the new spring collection at 20% off $75 or more with code IHEART20.
This is a special edition of The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. This hour, we're asking how you feel about the U.S. involvement in Venezuela. I'm joined by Fox News Chief National Security Correspondent Jennifer Griffin and Televisa anchor and managing editor Enrique Acevedo. You can call us at 844-4MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. Or you can reach out at listentothemiddle.com. Jennifer, what are you hearing about the idea of U.S. troops going into Venezuela? President Trump said he wasn't afraid of boots on the ground.
Well, again, going back to what one of the listeners pointed out is that if the U.S. wants to stabilize Venezuela, there's a contradiction because the State Department under DOJ got rid of any of the soft power groups that would be implementing that kind of stabilization, whether it's USAID or other parts of the State Department and other parts of the government that could help. So in terms of troops on the ground, I think one of the reasons they had to send in the U.S. military, and we learned today from Secretary Hegseth that about 200 U.S. personnel were on the ground for the raid, which only lasted about 30 minutes, which is really stunning. And we should give full credit to the U.S. military. What they pulled off with this operation is extraordinary, and only the U.S. military could do such a thing and get out without losing any people or equipment. But what I'm concerned about is without they're again talking tough and using bullying kind of language and threatening to send in troops or to strike again. But what is the strategy? What is the end goal? If you're not nation building, you're not into regime change, because that's not what Make America Great Again stands for, and the MAGA his MAGA supporters don't believe in that. But on the other hand, you're going to use the military for everything. We found that was the problem in Iraq when you didn't have enough diplomacy. They've just recalled 30 ambassadors, I believe, from the State Department and fired them, essentially. So who's going to be the ambassador? Where is the infrastructure to support the transition that Venezuelans are going to expect?
Let's go to Michael, who's calling in from South Bend, Indiana. Michael, go ahead with your thoughts about the U.S. involvement in Venezuela.
Yeah, I just think that as Americans, we get hung up on what we believe that we should think on certain issues, like especially for other countries or whatever. If the Venezuelan people think that we are doing the right thing, then are we not doing the right thing?
Interesting. And just is that what you think, that if the Venezuelan people think it's a good thing, then it should be done?
I mean, no, but also I think that I don't know. It's complicated, The Venezuelan people lost a dictator, and we gained something from it. Like, whether it's oil or it's just removing a dictator or whatever, it just can't be. I don't know. Is it better for people to have a dictator that, is bad for the people overall, or is it better for people to, be free of that dictator and kind of whatever comes from it?
Michael, thank you very much for that. Enrique, what do you think about that? It's sort of just a general confusion about it, but he's looking at the situation and saying the Venezuelans seem happy about this.
No, I think it's a very pragmatic approach to foreign policy, and it's in a way true. The problem is if this moment simply replaces one source of domination with another, the underlying problem remains in Venezuela. I think a sustainable transition depends on Venezuelans shaping their own destiny, their own institutions, not having them designed elsewhere. International support should enable legitimacy, not substitute for it. And just to react to something that a previous caller was saying, because I think Florida, he was calling, I think, from Tampa, Jeremy, and Florida in general, specifically South Florida, not Tampa, but specifically South Florida, plays an important role here because, and I don't know if Jennifer will agree with this, but the U.S. has never had a Secretary of State with Marco Rubio's cultural and political proximity to Latin America. He knows the region better than probably any other Secretary of State, certainly, but any other senior level official in Washington. He doesn't simply analyze what's happening. I think he comes from within its diasporas and narratives, and that gives him a unique fluency. But also a personal stake in what's happening, and that empathy can deepen understanding, absolutely. But also identity, I think, can harden some of the instincts. And I think it's an important part of this new dynamic in U.S. hemispheric policy.
Well, and by the way,
I would
if you look at
agree with that, Enrique, that Secretary Rubio is the first Secretary of State who really understands the region. In fact, we saw at his end-of-year press conference, he spent more than an hour with reporters speaking much of the time in Spanish. So he knows the language, which is a plus for Americans who usually go places that they don't know the language. But I also think he might have some tunnel vision with regards to Cuba, because I think one of his motivations for toppling Venezuela's dictator is that he thinks that Cuba will fall next, and that's what you've heard the White House saying today. Will that happen? What comes next? Again, the U.S. and what we've seen with U.S. foreign policy and with this White House is that there is sometimes a very short attention span. I remember I was in Israel when the hostage deal and ceasefire was arranged, and the U.S. military was supposed to take over Gaza, and there was supposed to be a security force to disarm Hamas. None of that has happened. And the Palestinian people are, while the guns may be mostly silent for now, nothing has really changed there for the Palestinian people and their aspirations. And I just worry about the same thing for the Venezuelans if there is not a cohesive strategy for what comes next. And again, there's not a lot of talk about, right now we talk about removing a dictator, but the dictatorial regime, the exact same regime, is still in power right now and in control, and the security forces are still controlled by Maduro's people.
By the way, on the issue of the Floridian influence in the White House, it's not just Marco Rubio. Susie Wiles, the chief of staff, came out of Florida politics. President Trump is now a Florida resident. Pam Bondi was the attorney general of Florida before. So there's a lot of Florida, a lot of people who understand that South Florida political situation. Let's go to the other side of the country in Long Beach, California, and Jeff, who's calling in. Jeff, go ahead with your thoughts.
Yes, thank you. So I just want to say I don't think that that Trump's actions in Venezuela have anything to do with drug trafficking. I don't think they have anything to do with oil. I think he's doing what many presidents before him have done, and saying, don't look over here at what's going on domestically. Look over here instead. You know, I'm screwing up things at home in the U.S., so instead focus on what a hero I am abroad. And I think that's the primary motivation. I think it's a power play, and it's just a way of distracting from domestic issues that he has no ability or desire to deal with.
It was just a couple of weeks ago, I guess, that the Epstein files were released by order of the law from Congress. Let's go to Jeff, who is in Nashua, New Hampshire. Jeff, go ahead. What do you think about the intervention in Venezuela?
Yes. Hi, Jeremy. Thank you for taking my call. I just want to say that what happened in Venezuela is just merely the beginning of greater, bigger, worse things to come. And that's what I'm getting a little worried about, because this could result in other countries doing the same thing or committing the same circumstances, all right? And say the Middle East, for example, Iran, any oil-rich nation, or other nations that are different minerals, whatever. Also, it could also incite and provoke countries like China, say, to possibly attack Taiwan, Russia, Vladimir Putin, you say he might divert his attention from Ukraine, and God forbid, decide to attack a NATO country. So, in other words, basically what it is that you could be playing with the possibility of World War III. And I'm not trying to, incite, arouse anybody or alarm anybody, but I'm looking at some greater possibilities here, and that's what I'm getting a little worried about this. So I just want to let you know about that. But so
thank you, Jeff.
That's pretty much it.
No, thank you for that.
Hey.
And Enrique, I wonder, in the region and your newscast, are these things coming up? Are you thinking about China and Russia as part of this situation, or is it just kind of like, no, wait, what about Cuba? What about Mexico? What about Colombia? What about these countries?
Of course, proximity is a powerful element in journalism, and we are concerned with that proximity, with some of the rhetoric coming out of Washington and what's happening with Mexico. Again, I would highlight that Mexico and the U.S. have a very different and unique relationship compared to the rest of the hemisphere, and a different level of cooperation. Marco Rubio has called it a historic cooperation in terms of the border and security. But it's impossible also to ignore the geopolitics of this moment. We're seeing a new global reality. Jennifer was talking about the Middle East, the war in Ukraine. Today, we saw leaders in Europe having discussions about what to do in Europe, China and Taiwan. And so Greenland and what Stephen Miller said tonight from the White House. So it's impossible to ignore that and to try to place that proximity in a larger reality, geopolitical reality. So these are complex times. We're starting the year with actions that are configuring a new global order.
Yeah. Eric is calling in from Atlanta, Georgia. Hi, Eric. Go ahead with your thoughts.
I think that this is a big mistake, and I think it's a big error, and I think it's very stupid what Trump did. And America's always been more or less on the wrong side of history. And then you can look an example, the country Nicaragua. It was once taken over by an American lawyer from Tennessee named William Walker. He just said he was going to be the king of that country. So that's kind of like what Trump is doing. And the American government has assassinated and overthrown most of the countries in South America, like Salvador Allende in Chile. They did Zelaya. They kidnapped him in his pajamas. So it's kind of like how they did. And also Aristide in Haiti. So yeah, it's a big mistake. I think that the chickens are going to come on the roost, and it ain't going to be a pretty thing. And Trump is really doing this to take pressure off himself from the Epstein files and the genocide that he's involved in with Netanyahu against the Palestinian people. So
all right,
it ain't good.
Let me take that to our guests. Thank you, Eric. Jennifer Griffin, I wonder if there are people out there, there are many people out there, it's clear from the polls already, like Eric, who are not a fan of this. Are people in Washington, not just in the White House, but in Congress, worried about the politics of this and whether there will be support for whatever needs to happen in Venezuela from the U.S. perspective?
Well, I think from the polls that we've seen so far in its early days, the country is split, just like they're split on most of our politics. And I think it's about 42% are in favor and 40, I can't remember the numbers, but it's about 40 to 40 and 18% is unknown. So it's worrisome because, again, this is a major decision by the White House, and there was no consultation with Congress in advance. They say that because they didn't think Congress could keep the secret. But you had Secretary Rubio go to a classified briefing just a few weeks ago and tell the senators and congressmen that this was not going to happen, that there was not going to be military action in Venezuela, there was not going to be regime change, there was not going to be the overthrow of Maduro. How do you believe anything that they're saying when there's such contradictions on a daily and weekly basis? And even within Trump's inner circle, there are different motivations. Stephen Miller has a different motivation than Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio is focused on Cuba. Stephen Miller is focused on getting the 600 to 700,000 Venezuelans who came to the U.S. in the last few years of the Biden administration back to Venezuela. How is that going to work? Or do they want to go back? How quickly can you stabilize the country? And more importantly, they're talking about the oil, but that oil, the infrastructure of that oil is on the verge of collapse because the oil embargo of the ships, they don't have any place to store the oil that has been built up and is there. The storage facilities aren't there. And if they don't keep pumping, the infrastructure collapses. So everything is very tenuous, and it just doesn't seem as though there is a strategic plan. There's some points on a bulletin board that they're suggesting that oil companies are going to go in, but oil companies are responsible to shareholders, and right now it's not stable enough for them to go in and make huge investments. And it also won't have returns for a number of years.
I'm going to sneak one more very brief call in from Frank in Boston, Massachusetts. Frank, just go ahead quickly, please, with your thoughts.
Yeah, it's too bad that they didn't use the attacking those drug boats and extended it into Colombia to get the cartel, bomb the cartels in Colombia and in Mexico, and got those nations to say, we want you in here to get rid of these drug gangs that are taking over our country. Instead, he goes and he brings this guy out of Venezuela just to save face, because all they were saying at that news conference after this thing, you got to believe what Trump says. Trump is going to do this. Trump is going to do that. It's like they were propping him up to be this big old gorilla.
Okay. Well, interesting note to end it on. Enrique, I guess I'll bring it back to you for the last word here. But at the end of the day, the administration did say this was about drugs. Do the people that you're speaking to in your audience believe that?
I think drug cartels have incredible power and have challenged state institutions throughout Latin America. I think people in Latin America welcome the U.S.'s interest in trying to solve this problem, especially the penetration of narco organizations into political institutions, into not just trying to threaten elected leaders, but becoming the elected leaders in parts of Latin America, including Mexico. I think you will not hear much resistance from anyone in Latin America to the idea that this is a problem that needs to be solved. But the single action that could really change this dynamic and at the hands of the U.S. is to restrict the sale of guns to criminal organizations. Like I said at the beginning, 80% of the guns seized to drug cartels in Latin America come from the U.S.
coming from the United States.
Yeah, we're fighting organizations at the same time that we're providing their firepower.
That is Enrique Acevedo, who is managing editor and anchor of En Punto on Televisa, joining us from Mexico City, and Fox News chief national security correspondent Jennifer Griffin in Washington. Thank you so much to both of you.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you.
And you can continue this conversation by going to listentothemiddle.com. You can sign up for our weekly Substack newsletter where you can find out all the topics we'll be doing ahead of time and join the conversation with other Middle subscribers. The Middle is brought to you by Long Nook Media, distributed by Illinois Public Media in Urbana, Illinois, produced by Harrison Patino, Danny Alexander, Sam Burmistaz, John Barth, Annika Deschler, and Brandon Kondratz. Our technical director is Steve Mork. I'm Jeremy Hobson. Thanks for listening.